Underwater Special Forces of Russia is a book about serious people and real exploits. There are no fictional stories or embellished facts, and there are no fakes in it. The author, Vitali Pasid, who stood at the origins of the Soviet Naval Special Forces, described the long path of the formation of the Underwater Special Forces. The readers of the book are military reconnaissance divers, Marine Special Forces who have operated in almost all areas and oceans of the Earth. The book is unique in that it provides detailed information about the weapons, equipment and combat training of special purpose divers and Spetsnaz, and also a little bit about UFOs and extraterrestrials. There was a very interesting incident that took place in Russia in the 1970s. This incident was witnessed by very capable Soviet Marine Special Forces, Marine Spetsnaz. So let's start with Vitali Garogovits Pasid. The events that you will hear about were described in the book about the history of the Soviet Special Forces, and it was written by the then captain of first rank, Pasid. It was in the Baku Naval School, which was located next to a secret unit which was under the command of Captain Vitali Pasid. For many years, the Soviet Baku in Azerbaijan had been at the center of education for the elite armies of the world. Africa, along with 32 countries from the Arab world, in the Middle East, Cuba and other Latin American countries, as well as the superwar countries like Bulgaria and East Germany, sent their promising young cadets to be trained in a military unit where they became officers and commanders, and also creators of special force units back in their homelands. 5 Germans who were citizens of the USSR also served in this training unit. These men were from the German settlement in Kazakhstan. After the collapse of the Soviet Union, they all left for Germany, and of course the main contingent of trained special forces was recruited from among the best results from all over the Soviet Union. One can assume that the author would have been known to those in the West who had followed the developments in the USSR. If they had also read the book, then they would have learned about the UFOs and gleaned an insight into the attitude of the commanders of the Soviet armed forces to the UFO phenomenon. Pasid became the commander of this unit, and before heading to one of the most elite military units in the USSR, he became one of the most authoritative specialists in the area in the field of Marine Special Forces. Pasid was a participant of the Victory Parade on Red Square in Moscow in 1945, and he was awarded the Order of the Red Star along with 19 combat medals and state awards. After graduating from the Leningrad Naval School, Pasid served in the Baltic, where he created an exemplary school for training underwater special forces, and in 1969 the General Staff of the Navy entrusted him with the creation of a unit for the purpose of training of special forces of the so-called friendly countries for the Soviet Union. He insisted on stationing it in the Caspian Sea next to the Caspian Higher Military Naval Command College. Pasid himself entered the college in 1943, and some of his fellow students became future Soviet vice admirals. Later, other graduates of this college became ex-ministers of foreign affairs for the Russian Federation. They were the pride of the USR Navy in the 1980s and 1990s, and as part of the base ships, Captain Pasid visited Poland, Germany, Cuba, Indonesia, and many other countries on special missions. He knew the Caspian coast exceptionally well and proved its advantages over the Black Sea coast. The shells of the Russian, Azerbaijani, and 2 command sections of the Caspian coast were used for military exercises. The ideal bases for this kind of training are out at sea, in the mountains, in the Karakum Desert, and of course on the islands of the Baku archipelago. In many various conditions of the Caspian Basin, Pasid had worked out a methodology of conducting classes and exercises in order to create a universal special forces fighter, and the engineering and diving training ground of the unit was located 6 kilometers from the coast of Wolf Island. Pasid methods in the 1970s raised some objections. Why should the Marine Special Forces be training in the mountain and the forest? It soon became clear Russia was creating rapid reaction troops. According to the commander of the Airborne Force, Colonel General Vladimir Shamanov, the basis of the training was to create airborne troops. Paratroopers have been fighting according to the rules of hybrid wars for a long time. Previously, the Special Forces brigades of the armed forces and the Marines were subordinate to the Commander-in-Chief of the Navy. In 2015, Russian armed forces arrived at what Pasid had created in the Caspian Sea in 1970, Universal Special Forces. Pasid served until January 1983, after which he retired to the reserve, but he never stopped working. In 1992, after the collapse of the USSR, the commander of the Caspian Flotilla invited Pasid to the post for the head of the Operational Intelligence Department. For 8 years, Pasid was engaged in training national personnel in this field, and he passed away in 2013, but is well remembered in Russia and Azerbaijan. On June of 1953, the GRU, or Main Intelligence Directorate of the General Staff of the USSR Armed Forces, decided to form several separate special-purpose marine reconnaissance stations. At first, they were called Separate Marine Reconnaissance Divisions of Light Reconnaissance Divers, combat swimmers of special intelligence designed to conduct operations of special importance. This is important in itself. Let's begin with what Captain Pasid encountered, according to an expert from his book. During the entire period of the existence of the Special Forces Unit in the Caspian Sea, along with performing the main task of training special agent groups, we did a lot of work to maintain our reconnaissance groups in constant combat readiness. The excellent climatic conditions of the Caspian Sea theatre allowed us to conduct combat training all year, and we used it 100%. The presence of a part of the supply ships, favourable conditions for recreation for divers, high-calorie food supplemented with gifts of the Caspian Sea, plus autonomous additional power supplies issued during multi-day exits or missions, they allowed us to break away from the base for long periods and to work out elements of combat training in various areas of the Caspian Sea. Willy-nilly, we had to plan our combat training closer to sunset and devote most of our time to night training. Of course, the temperature differences had its own plus for us, but nevertheless, despite all the difficulties, we had to swim during the day, and the reason for this was for the following circumstance. In July 1976, I was unexpectedly called at night to the flotilla headquarters, where the task was to immediately begin examining the underwater part of the large island of Kara Ada, located at the entrance to the port of Begdash, for the detection of an underwater base which could be used by ultra-small submarines. The order had been given and it was not subject to discussion, even though the question, where did they come from, was on the tip of my tongue, these ultra-small submarines. There is one in Iran, an Italian 5x404, which they either bought or entered from Pakistan for a while. The remaining 3 Pakistani ultra-small submarines were in Karachi. Iran had been trying to transport it to the Caspian Sea for a long time. It won't work by rail, the tunnel doesn't allow it. It's possible to use highways, but you need to adjust the height of the trailer to the height of the tunnel. Less than a day had passed, and at that time we were preparing for a voyage when a message came from the same Begdash, that's the area of the small island of Karada. The head of the city's rescue station noticed an extraterrestrial. When he realized he had attracted attention to himself, he turned to run. He moved with 7-foot-long steps and got into a canoe-type boat, rowing hard, and he headed towards the big island of Kara Ada. The rescuer rushed after him, and even with the speed of 2 Whirlwind model outboard engines, he couldn't catch up. He told me these details himself at a meeting. In a word, our preparations were brief, and by the end of the day, we left for our destination with 2 boats, a communication cutter vessel, and a diving marine boat. But the events that followed us during the crossing of the sea. Somewhere, after about 23 hours, we were approaching Jeloi Island, and I was called to the bridge by the commander of the communication cutter vessel. There were also other officers, midshipmen, petty officers, and sailors. The commander drew my attention to a bright dot that was approaching us from the depths of the universe, and everyone on the bridge felt some kind of depressed state as it approached. After a moment, it abruptly changed direction and disappeared. The helmsman noticed that the magnetic compass was agitating all the time. The compass card was clearly restless, but with the disappearance of the dot, it had calmed down. Later we checked the compass corrections. They didn't differ from the tabular ones, and the gyro compass behaved normally. Frankly, I myself felt some discomfort watching that dot, but with its disappearance everything fell into place and we arrived safely in Begdash. The reconnaissance divers who were on the bridge at that ill-fated moment told me that they periodically observed this standing watch at outdoor posts in the northern part of the sky. They do not attach any importance to it, although they do experience a depressing feeling. In Begdash, when I met with the Chief of Staff of the Caspian Red Banner military flotilla, I casually told him about the UFO I'd seen in the sea. He grinned and asked if I'd had too much to drink before the trip. In short, I did not share what had happened with anyone else. These were the years when there were global discussions relating to the appearance of UFOs. The alleged meetings between the people of various countries and continents with excess extraterrestrials and other anomalous phenomena. They were very actively covered in the wide general press. Somewhere at the end of 1976, the commander of the flotilla, Vice Admiral Leonid Danilovich Ryabtsev, suddenly gathered at the commander's deputies for the political unit and chiefs of staff, affirmations and units in a conference hall. He introduced us to the representative of the USSR Academy of Sciences, Reserve Officer Vyajaja, who had arrived from Moscow. Vyajaja's message was sensational for all of us. He began by reading out a message from the White TASS. For those who don't know, White TASS was a classified or top-secret document. This document reported the Prime Minister of Iran addressing the Chairman of the Council of Ministers of the USSR, A.N. Kazygan. He asked for the explanation of an unforeseen incident that occurred at the bottom of a military airfield near Tehran, when fighter pilots returning from flights found a device similar to a saucer, and near it, 3 huge people allegedly dressed in high-altitude suits. They hurriedly climbed up the ladder into the saucer, and at a moment later the saucer took off without a sound and accelerated with great speed. The alarm jet fighters tried to unsuccessfully approach the saucer, and realizing that this was impossible due to the speed difference, so they launched air-to-air missiles. However, to the amazement of the pilots, the missiles turned off when approaching the target and continued to fly in a straight line. Further to this, Vyajaja gave several more examples of the appearance of UFOs, in particular in the report of the head of intelligence of the Pacific Fleet, Rear Admiral V.A. Domyslovsky. Domyslovsky reported the discovery of a huge UFO mothership and several small saucers that took off from under the water and boarded the mothership. Then they divided again. Moreover, Ajaja, who knew me as a former chief of the star in Parusny, showed me a sheet on which Admiral Domyslovsky's signature was placed. He asked me to certify it, and of course I recognized it, so he was able to dispel the doubts for those present. For 2 hours he amazed us with such messages, while presenting written confirmations, and the Chief of Staff of the Caspian Red Banner military flotilla, Rear Admiral Mikhailovich Boinov, also reported on our observations during the sea crossing in the area of Jeloy Island. He added that the second secretary of the Caspian Regional Committee of the Communist Party of the Soviet Union had already told him something similar about the appearance of luminous dots in the northern part of the sky. Ajaja asked for these observations, and they were recorded in the navigation and watch logs of the boats to be submitted in an official manner to the main headquarters of the Navy for the Academy of Sciences and the USSR. At first, all of this was talked about in the entire flotilla and the Caspian Higher Military Naval Command College, but after some time passed, the head of the Hydrographic Department of the USSR Ministry of Defense, Admiral Rasa Hall, arrived in the Banner Caspian military flotilla and, speaking at the college, loudly declared that he would not listen to such nonsense from now on. Well, I had already begun to forget about all the conversations related to UFOs when I suddenly received communications from the Intelligence Department of the General Staff of the Soviet Navy with a demand to immediately send an extract from the navigation log of the communications scatter vessel about the phenomena observed on that ill-fated night near the Caspian island of Jeloy. This is what Captain Pasid described in his book. So viewers, you're in the first in the West, or wherever you are, looking at this video from, to hear this detailed account of the extraterrestrial UFO encounter in the Caspian Sea. It would certainly be nice to know more details, but the situation as it existed back then in the Soviet Union, while UFOs and USOs were present, their existence was always denied. Later, the government started studying them, and there is available information about these special programs that the Navy actually initiated. This idiotic practice of denial is not so privy to the Soviet Union only. The situation was no better in the United States, the United Kingdom, and other countries. They studied and still study this phenomenon, but they continue to deny and refute this. We'll end on a final excerpt from Captain Pasid's book. The people of the ancient world, having named our planet Earth, did not imagine that it was 3/4 occupied by the ocean, which from time immemorial attracts with its mystery and frightens us with a formidable force, promising untold reaches and promising great dangers. People have always succumbed to the hypnosis of the ocean. It resides in the depth of our subconscious and is one of the primary elements along with fire, air, and lightning. We vaguely imagine that the moving mass of water, subject to the rhythm of the heavenly bodies, is the source of life, and is closely connected with the origin of man and his fate. The centuries-old history of human society, whose entire path to progress is closely connected with the ocean, with the developments of its huge food, raw materials, fuel, and energy resources. However, in the centuries-old history of our planet, there are many catastrophic wars that often unfolded in the vastness of the world's oceans. This is a direct threat to security from the ocean expanses. There is a clear paradox. The ocean is the blue mirror of the planet, the cradle of life on Earth, the only road connecting the peoples of various continents for centuries, and at the same time a threat to peaceful life. The ocean from the cradle of life becomes the arena of the most brutal battles, both on the surface and in the depths. The predictions of the great Leonardo, who destroyed the drawings of his submarine, came true. People are so evil and insidious that they would be ready to kill each other, even on the seabed. We mess with the oceans and the extraterrestrials, or descendants of ancient advanced civilizations that survived previous global disasters, and they in turn will mess with us. The Soviet Union has its own variety of Men in Black, an organization that investigated cases related to visits to Earth by aliens and UFOs. However, unlike Hollywood, the agents were not secret, but quite official, called the Commission on Anomalous Phenomena of the Russian Geographical Society of the Soviet and later Russian Academy of Sciences. And instead of fantastic technologies in each individual case, they relied on common sense, rationality, and a scientific approach. We want to remind you that here we're not speaking about the operations of the top secret Soviet military/academic UFO research program called Sietka. It had other names too during its existence 13 years after it officially ended. We described its work and discoveries known to us and other civilian researchers, and today we want again to look at a different entity and provide more details. Despite all ostentatious materialism, interest in the paranormal phenomena in the USSR was very strong. So back in the 1970s under Brezhnev, the Commission on Anomalous Phenomena came to be in Leningrad, and it was on the basis of the Russian Geographical Society. The Commission areas of interest included everything that could not be explained by traditional science, from UFOs to poltergeists. This Commission on Anomalous Phenomena of the Russian Geographical Society of the Soviet Academy of Sciences existed between 1980 and 2014. We've been in open contact with some Soviet ufologists since 1991 and in other types of contact before, so we knew about this commission and later we became acquainted with some of its members. The Commission on Anomalous Phenomena of the Russian Geographical Society was organized in 1980 by the efforts of enthusiasts, researchers of unidentified flying objects, poltergeist and other anomalous phenomena in the environment. The Commission conducted research in the following areas: the history of civilization and polio context, better known to the West as ancient alien hypothesis. Soviet scientists and researchers had been investigating this hypothesis well before anyone outside the Soviet borders. Also, problems of astronomy and astrophysics and anomalous phenomena. Interviewing eyewitnesses of anomalous phenomena and their study, they were working to create a so-called systemization to work out the process of how to do it properly. They were also conducting research on bioenergetic or bioenergetic aspects of the issue or problem of anomalous phenomena. History, religion, and the problem of anomalous phenomenon, military aspects of the UFO problem, and so on. After more than 30 years' research activities in the Commission on Anomalous Phenomena, it had acquired experienced study, first of all of unidentified flying objects. It created an archive of observations of anomalous phenomena. This is like paranormal phenomena in English. But Russians use that word. They developed techniques of questioning witnesses and criteria for the reliability of the information. The Commission had conducted instrumental studies of the landings of UFOs in various regions and using various devices primarily in northwest Russia. It had also developed a methodology of research, and there has been philosophical evaluation of the achieved results. The Commission consisted mainly of military people, and almost all with high ranks, and that's according to the Russian ufologist and former chairman of the Leningrad Commission, Mikhail Gerstein. We've known of Mikhail now for over 20 years, and we believe that he is the best UFO researcher in Russia today. Mikhail mentioned in an interview with Russian media that the activities of the Commission, associates or members, were not exactly classified. Rather, it's simply all this activity was not brought to the attention of the general public in the Soviet Union. The meetings were closed to foreign participants in the Soviet Union, and the reports were often stamped with a signature stamp saying for office use only. Soviet and later Russian scientists, academics, professors, and candidates of sciences also worked as part of the Commission. For almost 30 years, they had conducted several hundred expeditions and interviewed probably thousands of eyewitnesses, said Gerstein. 9 times out of 10, there was nothing really strange about their stories. People could mistake anything for a UFO, from an aeroplane flying with its lights on to planet Venus, but still, it was always the 1 in 10 lucky cases, and sometimes it happens so the impression of an encounter with the unknown redeem everything, and then some. For example, in the years 1989 to 1993, in a district of Leningrad, in a village, people encountered huge 2 and sometimes 3 meter tall dark figures without faces. All the eyewitnesses said that the figures were moving, either walking, but as if their legs didn't bend at the knees, or they were floating in the air. Those aliens showed no hostility to humans. As a rule, they were just nearby humans. During a 5-year period, he'd said that they'd maybe 8 or 10 reports of a meeting with them, and from people who are not related to each other in any way, and they didn't know each other at all. According to Mikhail, one of the eyewitnesses saw this creature come out of a flying saucer that landed on a vacant lot near the village. So Gerstein went to the place himself. He traveled there, he followed the route where the black or dark figures were most often seen, and tried to find a tree or a bush or some pipe in the dark. Could have been mistaken for a human silhouette outline, but he didn't find anything. Mikhail is a very tenacious researcher and also knows firsthand about these so-called extraterrestrial implants, foreign objects that were inexplicably found in human bodies. One scientist injured his hand at the Dachau country home, and he went for an X-ray, and a foreign body was found in his hand. The doctor thought it was a fragment from some mine or shell. However, it turned out that no mines or shells were near the scientist, of course, and nothing had exploded recently or at any time. It didn't look like a shard, but rather a metal seed, smooth and rounded at the edges. According to Gerstein, such stories have been found in the media for at least the last few decades. Almost people who talk about the phenomenon have experienced blackouts. Many years before all of these events, a scientist was traveling on a train home and at one point seemed to lose consciousness, fainted, and woke up 2 hours later in a completely different train carriage. His money and personal belongings were still with him. Nobody had taken anything. The Russian researcher mentioned that ufologists believe such implants can be used as striking devices. Unfortunately, that scientist categorically refused to remove the strange object from his hand, and soon after he passed away. Of course, the Commission's powers extended not only to Leningrad and the Leningrad region. For example, a report dated March 12, 1984, reported a case in a village in the Crimea, Soviet Ukraine. 3 boys found a 3-meter-long metal disc in a brushy hollow with a black spot in the center that looked like a rocket nozzle. Through the transparent lid, you could see the outlines of some devices and a flashing red light. The students tried to get closer, but a few meters away they seemed to run into an invisible wall. On the following evening, the boys told about finding 2 military cadets that they knew. The cadets, being Soviet people, conducted an educational conversation with the boys on the subject of materialism and racism and decided to visit the place where the alien object had been discovered. So the cadets did not find the device itself, but they found deep dents in the ground left by its telescopic legs, bushes broken by some massive object, and a circle of burned grass found exactly in the place where the nozzle had been located, so it immediately raised the skepticism of the cadets. The experts of the Commission on Anomalous Phenomena were dispatched to that location. They too couldn't find rational explanations for what they had observed, and therefore decided to consider the incident and manifestation of UFOs. There are many unknown strange things in the universe that are still incomprehensible to the human mind, but he is sure that sooner or later we will reach a level of development that will allow us, if not to study these things from beginning to end, at least be able to come closer to understanding them. Now let's listen to what another member of the Commission had to say. It was the Deputy Chairman of the Commission on Anomalous Phenomena of the Russian Geographical Society, Captain First Rank Soviet Navy Evgeny Litvinov. He was interviewed by Russian media back in 2010. His views may be controversial to some, but his knowledge of their Soviet Union and international underwater submersible objects phenomenon is phenomenal. We've studied his findings and his tremendous research work. Litvinov served with honor in the Soviet Navy. He served at secret facilities and aboard submarines and had good access years ago. Anyway, the captain was asked the following: "Why did you and your colleagues believe in aliens?" And he said that after comparing facts received from residents of different parts of our planet, all of them agree on one thing. All the people inhabiting the Earth in ancient times had so-called paleo contacts with representatives of more highly developed civilizations. There are more than 20,000 pieces of evidence of direct or indirect influence that aliens have had on our lives in our files. That was his response, so he was asked, "Where do you get your information from?" And he said, "From the press and from secret military archives." Sometimes we organized an exhibition in St. Petersburg, that's the name of Leningrad, during the event, he said. Visitors would come up to us and tell us unique stories pertaining to contacts with aliens. People would like to believe that we are treated humanely, but we must face the truth, and here's what he stated. Analyzing the information we have accumulated only on contacts with extraterrestrials, we have 6,000 messages and more than 25,000 cases related to kidnapping. We have come to the conclusion that these civilizations somehow affect our lives are of 3 types. Loyal to us humans, about 20%, neutral, 60%, and aggressive, 20%. If we put the neutral closer to the aggressive, that is those that have some selfish interest in humanity. It turns out that humans should be afraid of 80% of aliens. And as for alien abductions, in many cases of such kidnappings or abductions, people reported that they had been thoroughly sanitized and medically examined. Perhaps this is necessary for the study of human species, but it is possible that some of their doctors zombify people or do worse. They insert chips, implants for subsequent manipulation of human beings. Any civilization is interested in the presence of its agents on an alien planet. So he was asked if it turns out that any alien can do whatever they want with us, and there is no control over it. Litvinov replied that this was correct, But the Commission exists to gradually eliminate our illiteracy or relation to the representatives of other civilizations, and the Commission associates were always trying to develop at least some safety techniques. The Russian captain warned that, first of all, people need to know if a ship or a vessel or an alien has manifested in front of you, you should not in any case scream or yell. All this according to the stories of people who've been in such situations or turned into numbness or amnesia. For them, it is good if the memory loss is temporary. But it happens that uninvited guests can erase memories completely of people affected, including information about the name, place of residence, and professional skills. Secondly, contacts with alien is not welcome. The entire initiative should be as follows: only if they need to. They will come in contact with you, but if not, turn around and run away. When they try to talk to you, you must ask, who are you, and where are you from, and what do you do? Why do you need me? Loyal aliens often respond kindly and tell you about their good mission. Aggressors can refuse to contact you and they just leave. Thirdly, if you can, try not to think about bad things. The aliens are able to read human minds, as thoughts are nothing but waves that are a means of communication for the entire universe. We think in images, and sometimes before we have formed a verbal version of it, we can also get an instant reaction from aliens. Also, these waves can transmit information to humans as if talking to humans in these same images, and humans can see them as if in a dream. Soviet cosmonauts were not afraid to speak out, and the incredible knowledge they possessed, like Pavlo Popovich, about ancient aliens operating on our Earth. Now Litwina was asked on occasion, why can't the aliens train us humans? Why can't they raise us to their level? And he responded, perhaps we are as far away from them in development as the simplest insects are from us. Try explaining to an ant why you are moving its nest out of the way, or why you've killed half a dozen of his friends who tickled your heel when you were sitting by the fire. The ant will not understand you for sure. This is how the higher civilizations are. It's good if they're loyal, that is, they behave carefully with us. But there are aggressive and neutral ones, and Litwina reminded people that there are probably many more of them than the good ones. It doesn't bother them at all to crush humans like small insects. Their plans are unknown to us because they do not engage in conversations with people, but mainly use people for some research or introduction of their agents into terrestrial society. Probably loyal and aggressive civilizations are fighting for planet Earth at the highest level, according to him. Whoever wins will establish their own rules here. We have little information about who lives in what parts of the universe, so loyal aliens come to humans, according to Litwina, from the constellation of Canis Major and Taurus, and the neutral ones from the constellations of Reticulum Centauri, Cygnus, Libra, and Andromeda. And then, of course, there's the Orion constellation, and that's where the aggressors come from. Litwina was asked if you believe in the existence of your force, you should probably have been the first to establish contact with them. But he responded that he doesn't want to do that. If they had wanted to, they would have contacted us humans long ago. And in general practice, it shows that everyone who did establish such contact passed away. Despite his advanced age, Captain Litvinov did not want to go to the other world yet or to leave this planet. When some journalists in Russia tried to make fun of the Russian Navy captain, who doesn't shy away from his beliefs, they were told by representatives of the Society of the following: the Geographical Society is called to discuss all sorts of theories, even such fantastic ones as Litvinov's theories. If there are specialist scientists who can refute the theory of the members of the Commission on Anomalous Phenomena, the Russian Geographical Society is waiting for their letters and invites them to meetings that take place once a month according to the approved plan. That was years ago. The UFO research that had existed in the USSR had a tumultuous history. The Soviet research was unique due to the constraints of the totalitarian society, but there had been fascinating cases. Russian authors, books and videos have done their best to help build bridges many years ago and introduce Western audiences to Soviet ufology. But they were shocked when certain individuals in the West immediately attacked their work. It was as if they were panicked about information that is being brought forth from the USSR or the former Soviet Union, because obviously there are people who don't want bridges to be built and information exchanged on a civilian level. A lot of what we've talked about today is in the past, now history. The USSR disintegrated and new realities now exist where a unique country existed for almost 70 years, and that in turn, after another country, the Russian Empire, disintegrated after hundreds of years. But there is active research, for example, in Ukraine today, and that there are still civilian researchers in modern Russia, the younger generation, and as for military UFO research in modern Russia, we'll talk about it more some other time, and there is still more to bring into the very unique history of Soviet UFO research. A very unusual person in Russia and in the former Soviet Union who knew quite a lot suffered and paid dearly for his knowledge into alternative research. But people shouldn't forget him. So there's a newspaper in Russia called Savitsansky Kretno, and it's a very popular, respected Russian newspaper. It was on October of 2011, an article published in the newspaper, and the author was Vladimir Kozyrev. He's a writer and journalist, and the title in English would be Words of Professor Ludwig. Professor Ginrich Mavarich Ludwig was a highly educated Russian scientist and an inmate of Stalin's concentration camps. He was a philosopher, a scholar of ancient languages. He was a daring experimental architect, a teacher, a freethinker who lived in the stifling ideological climate of communism, and he was a person who didn't break down under enormous pressure, tortures, or betrayals. Soviet socialism was horrible, and millions of people were lost, but there were some who tried to stand out, to resist any way possible, and to help others, and Ludwig was one such person. He possessed a great deal of esoteric knowledge. Vladimir Kozyrev, the author of this article, was actually Ludwig's student in 1960, but it was only in the recent years that he discovered the scope of Professor Ludwig's knowledge, ideas, and legacy. There's so much more that needs to be discovered, and the Russian writer continues his quest. He's still not sure who Ginrich Ludwig really was, a phenomenally educated scientist who possessed encyclopedic knowledge. Was he a mystic? Was he a person who was ordained in the secret knowledge? What we know is that Professor Ludwig was able to study amazing ancient manuscripts during his visit to the Vatican's library in the 1920s. In the library, he read about extraterrestrials who had visited the Earth in antiquity. Subsequently, Ludwig began his research of the Maya civilization and interpreted their symbols to be spaceships and spacesuits. We're talking the 1920s here, so of course it was only in later years before some people in the West also had the same thoughts. In addition, Professor Ludwig mentioned that the library contained manuscripts about alchemy and ancient codes when the KGB of the time, the NKVD, arrested him in 1938. Professor Ludwig was accused of being a Vatican, Turkish, Polish, German, and American spy. He survived the concentration camps, the tortures, and he carried his incredible knowledge and language skills of many languages. He was fluent, including the ancient ones. His ideas and beliefs he took with him during the years of suffering and ideals. He was informed on or denounced to the secret police by his wife. Things like that happened a lot in the Soviet Union of that time and later too. Vladimir Kozyrev mentions that Professor Ludwig showed his students photocopies of Vatican's ancient manuscripts containing information about extraterrestrials that had visited our planet, and with drawings he described to them the hidden essence of ancient myths. He told them of the fiery pillar that destroyed an advanced ancient civilization. He showed the students photos of the fortress walls discovered in Babylon, melted with horrendous temperature, and believed that nuclear blasts had caused it. Professor Ludwig was very much interested in the Sumerian civilization and possessed great knowledge about it. He discussed the esoteric meaning of the pyramids in Egypt because to him they were a sort of energy machine. He studied the Etruscan civilization. He knew about the Kabbalah, But Professor Ludwig was also an inventor and designer of military technology. He helped his country even during his imprisonment during his days as an inmate of the Gulag, Soviet concentration camps, and it was during World War II that he had at least 17 inventions to his name, such as the construction of a military airfield in marshy areas, noiseless underground stations for testing of aerial engines, bomb throwers for close-range tank warfare, and much more. His reward was an extension of the prison sentence in 1942 for another 10 years, after he was denounced for his criticism of Stalin's policies. Inside the concentration camps, Ludwig knew the secrets of herbs and their esoteric medicinal properties, and once this knowledge helped him survive when he had to cure the wife of the concentration camp commander of phased death. This commander put his gun under the table and said, "You cure my wife to Ludwig, or the concentration camp commander would kill him." There is much more information even in the article. For example, Ludwig's friendships with other great and highly talented Russian scientists, such as Alexander Chivsky, whose work warned Russia about the sun. We had great scientific minds in the former Soviet Union and Russia, such as Chevsky and Ludwig. Some people say that Ludwig was on par with Leonardo da Vinci. Professor Jinrijk Mavo-Rich Ludwig passed away in 1973. Again, he had a fantastic intellect and made incredible discoveries. Vladimir Kozyrev, who was able to uncover the professor's notes and writings from the 1930s, will find more documents and materials. According to people who knew the professor, he was always a good-willed person, very tactical, had a sense of humor, but he was cryptic in many ways. He was closed off to others. This is due to his previous experiences, but he never talked to his students about his tortures or what he went through in the concentration camps. But he did once say that he offered the idea that a human being can endure the impossible. If he possesses knowledge, he can control his psyche. The only thing he shared besides that was his strange, sometimes mysterious phenomena that happened to him during his travels in the countries of Asia and the Mediterranean. He was released from the concentration camps in the 1950s after he'd spent 14 years in the Soviet concentration camps, so he had this idea, among many others, on the mortophogenesis, migration of nations, legends and ideas, symbols and languages. He was not far away from finally deciphering and finding the answers from the beginning of civilization. He believed he was on the verge of discovering the start of civilization in Mesopotamia was 6,000 years ago when this mysterious kingdom of Sumer came. He repeatedly said everything started in that area. Professor Ludwig decided to follow in the steps of Herodotus, and he did. He went to settlements in ancient Turkey, Iran, Iraq, Jordan, Egypt, Italy, and Greece, and he had with him artifacts, photographs, ruins of initial architecture, among a few other things. And when he was telling the students about his fiery pillar and this strange catastrophe which destroyed the ancient civilization, the professor showed them photographs of the fortress walls of the Babylon city, which we know melted under a huge temperature. It was melted to the height of 1.5 meters, and he thinks it was a nuclear explosion. But where would it have come from? Maybe from Atlantis. Where did these Sumerian people come from? This was one of the main interests that stimulates the Soviet or Russian scientists. However, there was so much more which has remained unanswered pertaining to his esoteric knowledge, which will only be answered by further investigations by Russian journalists. It leaves many with a single question: was this person from the Renaissance in a way, or from the future? We do not know. Today, we'll describe time travel with mirrors and why research by Soviet astrophysicist Nikolai Kozyrev is still classified. Panic, unconscious horror, dizziness, and the feeling of leaving the body. This is what those people who were engaged in the experiments with the use of mirrors in the USSR actually felt during the experiment, and after the first experiments, it became clear a time traveler must have excellent health and strong nerves. Mirrors have long been considered a window to another world. The ancient Slavs had a ban on sleeping and at the same time being reflected in a mirror. People were afraid that the human soul might go to another world and not return. Until now, modern school children and students are puzzled and mystically afraid of the claim that the image in the mirror does not exist until there is an observer, a person or a camera, and then the image of light rays reflected from the mirror surface will be formed in the brain or on a sensitive matrix. Well, Nikolai Kozyrev believed the world through the looking glass really existed, and that the time inside it changes the vector and goes in the opposite direction. He believed that this is a special kind of energy and developed the idea of causative mechanics, according to which time is expressed in causative relationships. They are always separated from each other in space and do not depend on the coordinate system. According to this theory, the energy of time feeds the stars, and therefore the nuclear fusion inside them never stops. In different parts of the universe, time has a different density, activity, and all physical processes in the universe occur within the absorption or allocated time. It's believed that time is a substance to which information is transmitted instantly to all points of the universe. This was proved by an experiment with distant stars. The light that traveled from them to Earth for hundreds of years was captured by a telescope and plunged scientists into the past. But they saw what happened many years ago. But it turned out, if you point the telescope at a place where the star is calculated to be in the present, the devices detect small deviation. In fact, they penetrate into the future. Kozyrev have pointed out that similar interaction occurs between time and the human brain. This is why there are such concepts as intuition or foresight. In some cases, a person can look into the future and learn it. And the special system of concave mirrors can help them in this. In the USSR, Kozyerev's ideas were not appreciated and his causative mechanics were declared to be pseudoscience. However, this did not happen immediately, but after a series of allegedly unsuccessful experiments. We need to understand that Russian scientist colleagues did not accept the science of his scientific papers. Despite this, the scientist has repeatedly stated in his speeches that time is the basis of all processes in our universe. In particular, Kozyrev claimed that all events that occur around us are carried out with the absorption or allocation of time, and in the last years of his life, Nikolai Kozyrev devoted himself to working on the creation of a time machine. But ironically, he didn't have time to complete the project. These structures are called mirrors, conditionally, as they are mainly aluminium structures made in the form of a spiral, which according to scientists can reflect physical time and can also focus certain types of radiation like lenses. These emitters can also be biological objects. The most common design, with which the greatest number of experiments were conducted, was a mirror sheet of polished aluminium, which is rolled in a special way in the form of a spiral of 1.5 turns clockwise. A volunteer chair and special equipment are placed inside the structure. A helmet like a pen with a sensor is put on the head of the volunteer. Many experiments were conducted in the early 1990s of the last century, in particular experiments on ESP. The results of the experiments are not entirely clear. For example, volunteers placed inside these spirals experienced a variety of abnormal sensations, such as leaving the body, telekinesis, telepathy, and transmitting thoughts at a distance. All this is recorded in detail in the research protocols. One of the goals was to study a person's clairvoyant abilities and 3 disabilities to foresee the future, to be able to investigate the events of the past. These abilities, according to the study, increased dramatically inside the room of curved metal mirrors. According to Kozyerev's theory, time changed its density inside the mirrors, which caused an increase in the extra-sensitive perception like ESP. Interesting stories were told by those who stayed inside the mirrored cameras. For several hours they began to feel like direct participants in historical events that they read about in school books. Right in front of them unfolded certain events of familiar and unfamiliar actions and characters. They saw all of this as if on a big movie screen. How all this happens remains a mystery. The mechanism of action of the mirrors on human consciousness and time is not yet known and has only just begun to be studied. It's difficult to say whether these subjects are transported in time or the events of those times are broadcast before the subject in the present. So based on his work, scientists from Novosibirsk, that's a scientific city for the most part in Siberia, created an installation that, according to their plans, was supposed to reflect time. It was given the name Kozyrek's mirrors. Subsequent experiments with this setup confirmed the fact that information about an event that has not yet occurred can be anticipated and transmitted. The fact that the experiments with the movement of human consciousness in time were conducted in the USSR became only known at the end of the 20th century. Again, a number of Novosibirsk scientists tried to repeat them in December 1990 in the remote polar village of Dixon. They assembled a system of Kozyrek's mirrors and conducted a series of experiments to transmit mental images over a distance, and they found that the subject placed in the same system of mirrors on the Russian mainland received about a third of the images correctly. Another third of the images arrived on the mainland with a delay of 5 to 10 hours, and a third was completely lost. The scientists themselves said that when the mirror system had been assembled, they couldn't go inside for a whole day. For the entire day, they were prevented by the fear that all the subjects had experienced. Only 24 hours later, the most courageous of the experimentalists managed to enter the place inside the system. Eyewitnesses said that the aurora borealis appeared in the sky above the laboratory during experiments, and all the subjects began to feel bad, or they had dizziness, nausea, increased or decreased blood pressure. They couldn't cope with the horror, they began to have headaches, and at the same time some experienced the feeling of leaving their body, while others actually saw some fragmentary pictures. More often from the past, they observed themselves from the outside, heard the voices of people from their childhood. Each time the experiment had to be interrupted due to people in the experiment's poor health. Things got even worse when it was decided to hold a communication session with British colleagues. Russian scientists passed the mental images of various signs previously and had received back 96 characters of the information, but at the same time invented, so to say, another 70 similar characters. But the real shenanigans began when the system started to make various mystical signs depicted on paper. Eyewitnesses even saw a UFO over the roof of the laboratory and a glow coming from the system of mirrors. The experiments were interrupted because there was some danger in their continuation, but they will be resumed sometime soon, and we'll be able to find out, hopefully, all the secrets that the Kozyrek's mirrors keep in them. And maybe even the first time machine will be designed to travel to the past or future, as you see in science fiction films. After all, many things that were previously considered to be fiction have now become our usual everyday reality. But were the Soviet academics right when they declared Kozyrek's mechanics as pseudoscience and banned experiments with mirrors? To answer this question, let's take a small trip to the past. Born in St. Petersburg, Soviet astrophysicist Nikolai Kozyrev worked at the Fukel Observatory. He worked there right after finishing postgraduate studies in 1931. Because Kozyrek's first scientific work was published when he was 17 years old, other scientists were delighted with the depth and clarity of his logic. His main work is related to astrophysics. He studied the atmospheres of the Sun and other stars, the phenomenon of solar eclipses, and the balance of radiation. By the age of 20, he graduated from the Leningrad University and received a degree on physics and mathematics. By the age of 28, Kozyrev was widely known as an outstanding astronomer, and he was teaching at several educational institutions. Although this may seem improbable to most people, Kozyrev showed that by shaking, rotating, heating, cooling, vibrating, or destroying physical objects, their weight can be increased or decreased by a small but remarkable amount, and this is just one aspect of his remarkable work. The universe can be expanded. This statement belongs to Nikolai Kozyrev, and it largely influenced the fate of scientists. The conviction of this possibility was the reason for Kozyrov's arrest and sentencing. In 1936, he was arrested and convicted on strange charges. The scientist was charged with believing in the theory of the expansion of the universe for considering he's sinning. Also, Gumilov, the Russian poet, was executed by communists in 1921. And yet another, Yesenian, had an American movie star for a wife who was suspected of being used as an enemy and most likely murdered, but this was disguised as suicide. Another claim was that Kozyrev was accused of going to steal the mighty Volga River and give it to the West. This was Soviet socialism at its best. So to say, this is what the Russians had to live under. Fortunately, after spending a long time in a Gulag prison, he was not sent to serve his full term in the concentration camps, but worked as a geophysicist in Norilsk. And by the way, for those who are interested in Russian paranormal history, this is where the Tunguska phenomenon took place in 1908. 3 months after his release, Kozyrev became a Doctor of Sciences in the theory of the internal structure of stars. Until 1958, he worked at the Crimean Observatory, and after his rehabilitation in Soviet terms, he returned to the Pulkowa Observatory. Nikolai Kozyrev believed that the reactions that occur inside stars are not only a source of stellar energy, in other words, the stars acted as a machine that processed an unknown type of energy. The astrophysicist suggested that this resource appears due to the energy of time scattered through the universe and is characterized by increased activity and is able to form in large quantities in certain places. Kozyrev came to the conclusion that time is material, because inside the stars, as a result of gravity, it turns into matter, and in the course of thermonuclear fusion matter, it burns up. It was the continuity of this process that prompted the scientist to this idea. Nikolai Kozyrev was convinced that a person could create an installation that could manage time, thereby enabling him to travel to the past or the future. Reflections and calculations on this subject have led to Kozyrev's mirrors. He put forward the theory that in a mirror world, time goes in the opposite direction. Kozyrev was convinced that the world in the looking glass really exists. He knew that in the mid-1800s, Louis Pasteur discovered that the building blocks of life, known as protoplasm, are not essentially symmetrical, and that colonies of microbes grow in a spiral structure. The same expanding proportions are embedded in the structure of plants, insects, animals, and people. As a result of observation in the area where he served his sentence as the enemy of the people, Kozyrev realized that in addition to the usual ways of acquiring energy through food, drink, respiration, and photosynthesis, all forms of life draw energy from an invisible spiral source. Kozyrev put forward the theory that the direction of the spiral growth of the shell and on which side of the human body the heart is located is determined by the direction of the energy flow. If somewhere in space-time there was a place where the energy flow spiraled in the opposite direction, then he would expect that the shells would grow in the opposite direction, and the heart would be on the opposite side of the body. When Kozyrev was finally set free in 1948 and was able to return to his research, he made many advanced predictions about the Moon, Venus, and Mars, which were later confirmed by Soviet spaceships. This earned him fame as the pioneer of the Soviet space race. In 1958, Kozyrev again shocked the world by claiming that the Moon was showing volcanic activity in the Offenses crater. If this is true, which most astronomers and scientists absolutely refuse to believe, then the Moon has huge natural resources and energy sources. Possibly modern space explorers and Silicon Valley disruptors understand that Kozyrev was right. As we have said, spiral energy patterns in nature were revealed to Kozyrev's eyes when he was a prisoner. He realized that the spiral energy is actually the true nature and manifestation of time. Obviously, he felt that time as we know it was much more than a junction of duration. Kozyrev insisted that if we try to think about the reason for the existence of time, about something tangible and identifiable in the universe that can be linked to time, we know that due to orbital patterns of the Earth and the solar systems, we can trace a complex spiral pattern. On May the 29th, 1919, this was when a total solar eclipse was used to test the Albert Einstein's revolutionary theory of gravity known as general relativity. Einstein himself was relatively unknown at the time he had proposed general relativity in 1915, and scientists had been intrigued by the entirely new way of thinking about gravity. For example, the idea that mass can cause space to curve, but no one had proven Einstein correct. Then on May the 29th, 1919, an expedition of English scientists travelled to the island of Principe off the west coast of Africa to observe a total solar eclipse. The scientists' measurements during the eclipse showed that, astoundingly, Einstein's predictions were correct. Stars could be seen at the edge of the sun during the eclipse, while the moon blocked the sun's light. The stars' locations appeared displaced because their light had to travel to us, not on a straight path, but under curved space and around the sun, as described by Einstein. So, it took Einstein to figure out gravity through modus operandi. Gravity, Einstein showed, did not just make what goes up always comes down, gravity made the universe go around. The Russian scientists' scientific discoveries are indisputable and recognized. Kozyrev developed the theory of extended stellar atmospheres and discovered the feature of stellar radiation, developed the theory of sunspots, assuming that they're balanced by the surrounding photosphere, discovered hydrogen in the atmosphere of Mercury and nitrogen on Venus, discovered emissions of hydrogen and carbon from under the surface of the Moon, which indicated volcanic activity under the surface of our satellite. Previously, it was believed that volcanoes on the Moon had been silent for 1 billion years. Many years ago, a report by a Professor Kozyrev of the Phuket Observatory was published in the Proceedings of Moscow University, which struck the imagination with the paradoxical nature of its conclusions, not only for the people who were ignorant about such things, but also for specialists. Since Nikolai Kozyrev was an astronomer in his main speciality, at first he was talking about purely astronomical things. The Moon has long been considered a dead celestial body that had already completed its evolution. Then suddenly, there was a scientist who publicly declared this natural satellite of the Earth, volcanic activity, is quite possible. He was criticized, to put it mildly, by his colleagues for such anti-scientific statements. However, the scientific world was surprised in 1958 when Kozyrev observed a volcanic eruption in the crater Alphonsus with his telescope and even managed to get its spectrogram. It took a good 10 years before Kozyrev's observations were recognized as completely reliable. Only in December 1969, the State Committee for Discoveries and Inventions of the USSR gave the scientist a diploma for the discovery of lunar volcanism, and the following year, the International Astronomical Society awarded him a personalized gold medal with a diamond image of the constellation Ursa Major. So the fact remains that there is a volcano on the Moon, and there's nothing that can be done about it. However, many skeptics could not calm down. Kozyrev realized his discovery in a very unusual way, and the fact that Nikolai Kozyrev believed that the basis of lunar volcanoes should be found in the flow of time. Kozyrev also predicted that the Moon's lack of a magnetic field and higher temperature of up to 200,000 degrees Kelvin inside Jupiter. In 1970, he was awarded the Gold Medal of the International Academy of Astronauts, and suddenly such a venerable scientist developed a pseudoscience in which he allowed the discovery of a clairvoyant in every person, but somehow one doesn't fit well with the other. That fit is completely different. We can assume that Kozyrev really managed to achieve amazing results in his experiments, results that surprised and quite understandably frightened the Soviet leadership. Tuva, or Tuva, officially the Tuva Republic, is a federal subject of Russia, a republic also defined in the Constitution of the Russian Federation as a state. The Tuva Republic lies at the geographical center of Asia in southern Siberia. The republic borders the Altai Republic, the Republic of Khakassia Irkutsk region and the Republic of Buryatia in Russia and Mongolia to the south. The region is also claimed by the Taiwanese major political party Kuomintang as part of the Republic of China. There was a very interesting discovery there. First, a little bit of history. Immigrants from northern China appeared in Tuva during the era of the Great Migration of Peoples. This is evidenced by a new archaeological monument of this period discovered in the flooding zone of the Sayano-Shushinskaya hydroelectric power station by the Tuva Archaeological Expedition of the Institute of the History of Material Culture of the Russian Academy of Sciences. The monument became one of the most significant discoveries of the expedition in 2016, and its research has continued since then. It's a great discovery, and numerous archaeological sites have been discovered along the banks of the Yenisei River, according to the head of the expedition, Marina Kulisnovska, a senior researcher at the Department of Archaeology of the Central Asia and the Caucasus of the Russian Academy of Sciences. The most interesting is the Alatay burial ground, where 10 burials of the Huns were excavated, and nomadic people who lived in the steppes north of China in the 1st century BC to the 2nd century AD. This monument is a very important discovery, indicating that at the beginning of the era of the Great Migration of Peoples, a group of newcomers appeared in the territory of Tuva, apparently originating from northern China, and from this moment on, the formation of the Turkic ethnic groups began. Excavation in these areas began in 1965, during the construction of the Sayano-Shushinskaya hydroelectric power station. Thousands of cultural monuments were flooded, starting from the Paleolithic era, the Stone Age, and up to the late Middle Ages. So we do not know what other historical features are hidden from us, and those who follow the research about the Akutia cauldrons and the ancient aliens of Akutia know that the same situation took place in Akutia, where because of these artifacts at the site, such as the cauldrons, were flooded, and we know where they are, but they're covered by tons of water. An object was found in the Alatay burial ground in Tuva, which the archaeologists themselves dubbed or called a smartphone. It looks very much like a modern gadget. It's a flat rectangle decorated with turquoise, carnelian, and mother-of-pearls. Scientists believe that this is a belt buckle and believe that its age is more than 2,100 years, and much more. It's not known what this artifact was, but it was clearly created with the help of some technological tools, and pay attention to its smooth edges and the neat holes. Perhaps the nomads of the Huns simply found a certain product left over from more ancient civilizations that existed in the territory of Siberia. This stylish accessory has already been jokingly dubbed the ancient iPhone, and its owner was named Natasha. Details of the archaeological discovery were given in a scientific article by Marina Kulisnovskaya and Pablo Lios, employees of the Institute of the History of Material Culture of the Russian Academy of Sciences, as follows from the material. The discovery was made back in 2016, but a detailed description of the artifacts found has become available to the general public very recently. The necropolis in Tuva was erected by representatives of the ancient nomadic people of Xiunan, who inhabited the steppes to the north of China from the 3rd century BC to the 2nd century AD. We're given a different period now and a different name. It was to protect against their aids that the Chinese Emperor Qin Shi Huangdi ordered the construction of fortifications known today as the Great Wall of China. The Xiunan were a tribal confederation of nomadic peoples who, according to ancient Chinese sources, inhabited the eastern Eurasian steppe from the 3rd century BC to the late 1st century AD. Chinese sources report that Modo Chanyu, the supreme leader, after 209 BC, founded the Xiunan Empire. The identity of the ethnic core of Xiunan has been the subject of different hypotheses because only a few words, mainly titles and personal names, were preserved in the Chinese sources. The name Xiunan may be the same as the Huns, although this is disputed by some scientists. The Hun state was at war with China throughout its short history, eventually disintegrating as a result of this conflict as well as internal strife. The area of settlement of the warlike nomads covered, among other things, the lands of modern Russia. About 110 graves were discovered by archaeologists on the island that temporarily comes out from the water when the waters become low. They were incredibly lucky to find the graves of rich nomads who were not affected by any actions of ancient tomb robbers, according to Kila Novatskaya. Scientists were able to determine the approximate age of the burial of Natasha thanks to some Chinese coins that once decorated the belt of the woman. They were minted 2,137 years ago, a massive black rectangular object similar to the iPhone, which turned out to be a buckle for this belt. According to archaeologists, the excavation of the graves at Alatay Necropolis will continue, and only after all the studies are completed, specialists will be able to give an accurate description of people's lives and their social differences in ancient society. One question does not give scientists any rest at the moment. If man's burials are based on the accompanying object, they would suggest they were quite poor, but for some reason, women are noticeably richer. So in the graves of men, they usually did not put other things except for ceramic vessels, iron knives and other everyday objects. In the graves of Alatay were invariably located in the waist area. This indicates that this element was part of the funeral attire. During excavations in other Xianan necropolis, for example, in Trans-Baikal or northern China, similar buckles were found at the feet or next to the buried person. The belt with a massive buckle, most likely an element of a woman's dress, which could initially be used as a wedding dress, was later worn on special solemn events, and departure to the afterlife, of course, is one of these. Buckles made of black amber were not as strong than similar products made of bronze or bone. Frequent exploitation made them unusual, as evidenced by the finds of fragments of such buckles during the excavation of this young new hill. In these places, archaeologists also found graves belonging to other eras, from the Bronze Age to Genghis Khan. Earlier, two partially mummified ancient fashionistas were discovered buried together with the items. They treated one of them, calling it Sleeping Beauty, who was originally considered a priestess, but in fact turned out to be a specialist in working with leather products. The second, in prehistoric times, worked as a weaver. Burials with bronze buckles, or as they're called, open-work plates, are of great interest. They're all unique. There are only a few dozen such bronze buckles around the world. In 2018, they found two small buckles which apparently were used to decorate shoes. There is a series of buckles with geometric patterns, and at the very end of the lines of the geometric pattern, the heads of horses or snakes are depicted. During the next excavations, archaeologists were attracted by an unusual find. Next to the ancient skeleton was an object of rectangular shape. During the excavations, an unusual accessory was found in a burial dating back to the Xianan era, which has not yet met with analogues. According to Marina Kilonovskaya, the age of the find is approximately 2100 BC. But if it was made in China at the time, it was ruled by the Xia dynasty, which lasted from 2100 BC to 1600 BC, and at that period they used stone tools like the hand axe. They also made use of fire and perfecting the stone tools that they created. Archaeology was improved during the Xia period, and pasturing was started along with irrigation technology that was greatly improved. The production of dried and earthen goods also took place. The use of ships and vehicles arose, and the use of varnish became commonplace. Silk production and weaving also took place during the Xia dynasty, as well as drilling and carving technology. But the most recognizable innovation during this period was the creation of the calendar, based on two different patterns. The use of jade bronze vessels and bronze casting became popular at that time. If this dates back to 2137 BC, then we need to remember this was a day of a memorable celestial event when the official Chinese records reported that the sun and the moon could not live peacefully together in the sky. And it was just the first total solar eclipse that made it into the history books. In fact, one scholar tracked down records of 916 solar eclipses between 2137 BC and 1785 AD in Chinese literature. Of course, it's only the year. We don't know if there's any connection when the iPhone buckle, or whatever the object was made of, we just don't know that. Let's go back to Tuva, one point where the Tuva expedition worked in 2016 and planned to continue, but we don't have too many updates, almost none about their findings so far. It was the territories bordering with Mongolia in the south of Tuva and the Opsinor Basin, and in Mongolia. The research was carried out here jointly with the Institute of Archaeology of Mongolia. During the study of the rock art monuments of Ura from 12 to 18 carat Takan, and two located here at the expedition, found several hundred new drawings reproducing scenes of processions of animals, hunting, battles, chariots, houses, figures of gods, deer, predators of different historical eras, Carrick Sewer, a mound resembling a wheel with spokes in design, and a ritual burial of the Bronze Age. They also discovered the 2nd millennium BC bones of red deer and bull. Since ancient times, a path connecting Tuva and Mongolia has passed through the Mongon Sakir Gorge, along with the Amasana himself, who was a hero of the people's resistance of the 18th century past. It's believed that all or maybe most living beings on our planet are well known and studied in detail by biologists, but this is not the case. Scientists are studying only one form of life on our planet, the protein life, but there is another life which is a cluster of the physical field. You look up at the sky on a clear day and it seems that it's absolutely clear, but it lives its own life invisible to people. It's literally teeming with strange objects, visible only in the bright rays of the sun. The whole sky is filled with them. Interestingly, objects are said to move only in one direction, bottom to top, with different angles at different speeds. The sizes of the objects are also different, but the speed of movement is very fast. The flight path of objects, as well as the speed with which they move, makes it possible to exclude the possibility that these are plant seeds or insects, according to some Russian researchers who were trying to film them not that long ago. Millions of strange objects are not visible to the human eye. Even a video camera is only able to see them if they are illuminated by the rays of the sun. What are they? Perhaps these are so-called plasmoids. Plasmoids, an energetic form of life that exists on Earth in parallel with the human civilization. This is a plasma system structured by its own magnetic field. Plasma is hot ionized gas. An example of this is ordinary fire. Plasma has the ability to dynamically interact with the magnetic field to keep the field in itself, and the field in turn orders the chaotic motion of charged plasma particles. Under certain conditions, a stable but dynamic system consisting of a plasma and a magnetified field can form. There is a hypothesis that plasmoids are one of the life forms that have existed on our planet for billions of years. In Western Europe, legends have been circulating since ancient times about fires that paralyzed the consciousness of a person and taken them away with it. Some researchers believe that the glowing spheres may have an alien origin. Human beings have encountered this life since their appearance on Earth, but we still know very little about them. If human beings can be called a ruler of the surface of the Earth, then according to some Russian researchers, this non-protein life can rightly be called the rulers of the planet's bowels and the sky above. The creatures that inhabit the Earth's firmament, and sometimes break out of it into the sky, possess varying names, but they have the same essence. In ancient times, they were considered the embodiment of the element of fire. Fire elementals, most often in historical chronicles with these elements of fire, appear as fire spheres. There was a Roman historian, Ammianus Marcellinus, and he described the appearance of the fire elementals in the year 362 AD or Common Era. Fireballs descended from the sky and burned all the workers who were trying to restore the temple in Jerusalem. Ammianus Marcellinus was born around 330 to 400 AD or Common Era. He was one of the last of the great Latin pagans historians of antiquity. He spoke about Jews in 4 separate passages of the history. The first one refers to Pompey's conquest of Jerusalem. In the second, he quotes the disparaging remarks of Marcus Aurelius regarding the Jewish people. But most importantly is the third passage, which contains a description of the attempt of Julian the Apostate to rebuild the temple in Jerusalem. He ascribes that this is not due to sympathy with the Jews, but because of the emperor's desire to leave a memorial to his reign. According to Marcellianus, the project was entrusted to a certain Alypius of Antioch, but it couldn't be executed because of an explosion of balls of fire on the Temple Mount. Julian the Apostate, Flavius Claudius Julianus, lived in the Common Era. He was a Roman emperor, and the story is extremely interesting, but in the 20th century descriptions of elementals took on a much more mundane appearance. But also, more specific, they were even captured on video camera. For example, on September the 12th at 9 o'clock in the evening, near the Russian village of Basia Udoli, the car of Dmitry Regan, a paranormal researcher, got stuck in the mud. The researcher himself described his encounter with a fiery creature. The fireballs sometimes moved slightly away behind low clouds and hung against the background of an almost black sky. It was about a third of the size of the moon's disk, but it didn't change shape. Its size to the optics of the TV camera. You could see its loose structure like cells of different shapes and sizes. I calmly filmed it for about 20 minutes. Fireballs floating in the air are common on Earth, but not ubiquitous. They definitely love some areas, and in those areas, the fireballs sometimes arrange real parades. Shigli became one of such zones favored by these fiery objects. The Shigli Mountains, or simply Shigli, are a range of wooded mountains located in Russia on the right bank of the Volga River inside the Samara Band. The Shigli are considered the only tectonically active mountains in eastern Russia. That's important. First having formed around 7 million years ago, the summits and other exposed areas of the Shigli are composed of limestone and dolomite sediments laid down 230 to 350 million years ago in the Permian and Carboniferous regions. For several years in a row, Samara, that's a city in Russia, a group of local historians came here to collect stories of local residents about their encounters with fiery entities. Local historians were lucky on one of the summer nights that they actually saw a real air parade over Shigli. Here's what one of the participants of the expedition wrote in his diary on August the 15th, 1990. At about 22 hours, I, as well as several of my comrades, observed a group of fireballs flying over the Shigli. Ahead of the group flew a large single ball with a small tail, followed by 9 smaller balls of spheres. They flew in a row of 3, shimmering with bright and long tails. Many of them believe that the fire elementals do not exist, and poetic stories about meeting with strange fiery objects that behave like living beings or are inspired by ancient myths and fairy tales, or just eyewitnesses of such meetings for the first time saw very ordinary ball lightning. Here's how the Canadian professor Michael Persinger explains the appearance of fire objects, balls and pillars. In the course of natural processes from a scientific point of view, these are fire objects that frighten people. They're born underground. Even very weak tectonic movements lead to mechanical stresses in siliceous rocks. Electricity is generated, which given their huge mass, can reach a significant value. Under its influence, a column of ionized air over the section of rocks can twist around the axis. As a result, it creates ball lightning bolts that have sizes from a few centimeters to 1 to 2 meters. Maybe what witnesses had seen over the tectonically active Shigli was that, but you see, not all the appearances of fireballs can be explained by natural causes. Russian researchers of the unknown who followed the mission Kazanchev have long been talking about the possibility of the existence of beings on our planet. The basis of life for these beings are energy fields. It's likely that the energy life forms were able to reach a high level of their development and are not predatory jellyfish floating in the oceans of air, but actually intelligent beings. In some Eastern mystical manuscripts that have come down to our time, for example, in a ball of fire, it's said that the existence on Earth of intelligent races that do not have a solid body, but are fire clusters. Russian researchers say that we must accept the idea that on Earth we don't know protein nucleic life well enough as energy beings can exist next to it. Moreover, encounters with them can end in tragedy. True, they can exist only in energetically active areas of the planet, in conditions of constant energy supply, primarily in places where powerful electromagnetic currents reach the Earth's surface, for example in the magnetic poles of the planet. Yuri Kashinov, a member of the Soviet expedition to the South Pole, recalled his meeting with such creatures. Kashinov lived in Leningrad. Shortly before his death, he told a journalist a story that he had kept secret for a long time. There's no wonder, because for such things in the USSR they were forbidden. If you did, you were put in a mental asylum. In 1959, the Soviet expedition that established the Mirny station in Antarctica sent a group of 6 explorers deep into the continent to reach the South Magnetic Pole. Only 2 of them returned. In the end, Kashinov recalled, they decided to tell the truth about what had happened. To his surprise, they believed them, but there was no convincing evidence. So what happened in 1959? The Soviet expedition for 3 weeks reached the South Magnetic Pole, and everything was going too well, Kashinov recalled. Troubles began for the expedition the next morning. 300 meters away from the all-terrain vehicle, a glowing ball jumped out of nowhere. The photographer of the expedition, Alexander Garadetsky, went forward with a camera in his hand. A glowing halo appeared around Garadetsky, and he screamed horribly. 2 shots rang out, and the group's senior officer, Andrei Kobylev, and the expedition's doctor, Rauman Kustov, were the ones who fired at the glowing ribbon. It swelled, sparks flew in all directions, and it disappeared with an explosion. Garadetsky lay dead. The back of his head, hands and back were charred. The glowing orbs reappeared on the path 2 days later. They appeared suddenly at an altitude of about 100 meters, then slowly descended, approaching the team. Kustov and Borissa started firing their rifles, and when Kashinov recovered from the shock, the balloon orbs were gone, and there was a smell of ozone in the air, as if after a severe thunderstorm. Kustov and Borissa lay dead in the snow, and the commander of the detachment, Andrei Kobylev, stood with his hands pressed to his eyes. He couldn't remember anything and didn't see anything, and sadly died on his return to the Mirny station.